All right, YouTube, welcome back to the show. I am honored to have Hank Warner here as our 500th guest on Surf Splendor. Hank's been shaping surfboards for 57 years. He's a founding member at the Wind and Sea Surf Club. He's shared meals and waves with too many legendary surf figures to mention here today. We discussed some of them in our podcast. But beyond his incredible resume, he's unrivaled in his humility, his groundedness. He deflects any reverence. He still shapes a surfboard every single day, 7 days a week. He'll sell it to you for cheaper than he should, simply because he believes that custom surfboards should be accessible to all, and you should be able to have multiples. He kind of epitomizes the exact character who I wanted to interview when I started Surf Splendor 10 years ago. So I'm honored to have him as our 500th guest. It'll actually be a two-parter. Today's part one. Next week we'll publish part two. And it's all made possible through support from realwatersports.com, VayerWatches.com, and Rourke.com. Real Water Sports just kicked off their mid-winter sale. They're making room for next season, up to 75% off site-wide at realwatersports.com. Of course, VayerWatches.com for ocean-ready watches, guaranteed waterproof. They're assembled in the USA. And then, of course, Rourke.com. They just dropped their Road to Somewhere spring collection, travel-tailored clothing and gear designed to be your companion on the road of exploration and discovery. So without further ado, my name is David Scales for Surf Splendor. I hope that you enjoy episode 500 of Surf Splendor with iconic surfboard builder and San Diego native, part one of two with Hank Warner. Enjoy.
Surf Splendor.
Hank Warner, happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Thanks for showing up.
You are welcome. How long have you been married?
Let's see. Married in a few weeks, 28 years. Cohabitating 31 and a half or so.
Wow. What do you do on your 28th Valentine's Day? Or I guess 31st Valentine's Day?
Well, my wife's a school teacher, so she gets up early and leaves. So I get up in the middle of the night and put her special goodies by the coffee machine. So when she says goodbye and I still look like I'm asleep, she has no idea that I've already beat her to it, because then she goes, and she goes, oh, mine's at school. Yeah, I'm sure she left it at school.
She's going to run by Target on the way home.
Yeah. See, I did it last night when she was playing tennis and acted like I didn't go anywhere. So
savvy.
Surprises are how you have to do it.
Savvy. So you still play the game. Surprising.
Well, happy wife, happy life. And she used to say I was her trophy husband. People would be looking for a 6'6", tall, dark, and handsome. They see some little short, half balding guy there. They go, "What? Is this a joke?"
Well, it's like the Oscar trophy.
Oh yeah,
bald on the top. It's about this high.
Yeah. Anyway, 30 years ago, she said she could be my retirement plan. So,
how's that working out?
It's working out pretty well.
Yeah.
Mortgage is paid every month.
Good. Good.
Not out of my cash flow.
Right. Which will become part of our talking points as we discuss surfboard building.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, I mean, that's a successful relationship by anybody's measure. So.
Well, I think her father needed somebody to have beers with on Sunday night at cards and dinner. So,
dude, if you get along with the parents, that's half the battle for sure.
Well,
makes things easier.
The best thing that ever happened was over 31 years ago, I met her parents, and the first thing they said to her the next day was, "Shelley, if for some reason it doesn't work out with Hank, can we stay friends with him?"
No
way. That was good.
That's amazing. So I was thinking an interesting first kind of opening question would be, considering how long you've been building boards, who is your longest repeat client? Like, how long have they been buying boards, and how many boards do you think they've purchased from you over the years?
Well, I'd say the longest one is Joe Roper. I started, making his boards in the late 70s when we were at G&S, and then before he went to Hawaii, started making his boards for pipe. And he would come back with refinements and things like that, and which was really cool, because at the time, most people would go to Hawaii, find out you can't make a board for Hawaii unless the local guys make it, because usually surfboards are made for that area, and you go there with an idea what the waves are like, but they're totally different. But Joe just stuck with me, didn't bail out and get local, just came back and, year after year after year. And, I've made them, 30, 40 boards over the year, all different sizes.
30 or 40 boards over the course of 50 years?
40 years, 50 years. It's been that long?
I mean, you said 70s, right?
Yeah.
So.
And so, now I'm making boards occasionally for his son, who's my godson, JoJo Roper. I can't take credit for his big wave riding. He gets those boards from Rusty.
Okay.
But, I make him some little short boards. He gets boards from a lot of people, but JoJo, he's still in there.
Where'd you grow up, and how'd you discover surfing?
Well, fortunately, I grew up right about 50 yards from the sand in Mission Beach, where the waves were. And my older sister was dating a guy named Billy Castor, who owned Olympic surfboards. So at 11 years old, I had access to a surfboard factory and see what was going on. And, just kind of went from there. That was 1961. And eventually they got married, and now I'm the uncle to their 4 kids because they both have passed on.
What were your parents doing in Mission Beach?
Well, that's kind of a long story.
We've got the time.
My dad's dad was nearly mayor of San Diego. He was runner-up in 1944. My mom's father was editor of the San Diego Sun, won the first Pulitzer Prize west of the Mississippi in 1922 for writing about the eclipse of the sun and the effect it had on the farm animals and the ladies of the night in Tijuana. And so she was a Mission Hills woman. My dad was kind of in the same boat. Well, he also bought some property down in South Mission, built a couple of duplexes. Unfortunately, within 2 years after that, they were divorced. So my mom was a single mom, never having to work before, and raising 3 kids in Mission Beach on the boardwalk. Fortunately, in those days, you didn't lock your front door, and everyone knew who all the kids were. If the parents were having their sunset cocktail hour, they could look down the sandy beach at Mission Beach and go, "Oh, the kids are fine. I can see them. There's 5 of them down there. That's all our kids. They're fine." So that was a good life growing up in Mission Beach. If anyone's familiar with that, I used to ride that boardwalk with no hands for a mile up to Pacific Beach, and sometimes with my surfboard on my head. Now you can't even negotiate that on foot. There's so many people on the boardwalk.
The culture has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Not just more crowded, but it's a totally different scene now. How does the eclipse affect the women of the night in TJ?
That's funny because
I don't really care about the farm animals, but
he had a way with words, I guess, and they reprinted his story pretty much on the front page of the San Diego Union every 15, 20 years when the same eclipse would happen. The last one was in 1992, so I kept the story. And basically what he said was, the women of the night in Tijuana look out their door at noon thinking it's already dark and time to go back to work.
So it was all a setup for a joke.
Yes.
Yeah, I can appreciate it. I appreciate that the Pulitzer Committee appreciated the comedy too.
Yeah, the one thing that I've noticed about this is a lot of the old journalist people of the time kind of poo-pooed his award because it was for a news story. Yeah. A news story is supposed to be something happens, you report on it. Well, he was savvy enough to bone up on what the eclipse was. And it started out 96 million miles away from Earth. The sun passes across and gets interrupted by the moon. And so just like CNN in the first Gulf War, when we actually could see it live, there they are seeing the eclipse of the sun and reading about it in the newspaper at the same time, being educated of what's going on. Because in 1921, it wasn't that much of a common knowledge, especially in Southern California when San Diego wasn't even on the map. So that had the impact, and that's what it was. And they go, "Oh, that wasn't fair. He wrote the story before it happened as a news story, but it had an impact.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very fortunate place to grow up, Mission Beach, and it's like a little enclave, and especially if it was safe back then.
Oh, yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
I had 2 paper routes from 11 to 14, and I'd be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the only cars I would see would be the odd night prowler of a police officer going down the alley. I would collect for the papers and be walking up and down the courts in Mission Beach with the change in my sock jangling. Well, after the mid-'60s and the hippie movement, I wouldn't have walked around with even money in my pocket at that age.
Really?
But it was pretty cool.
Super cool.
Yeah.
And to have access to a surfboard factory, too.
Yeah, and surfing right outside my door.
How are the waves? Have they changed?
Well, it was a sandbar, the waves. So basically, when it was big, the waves would break and reform. And when you're learning, you can get bashed into the wave by the soups, get to your feet, and then eventually, when it got to the shore break, it would reform, and then you could kind of angle and catch on before you're able to paddle into the waves. Yeah. And occasionally, there was some good peaks at different courts. And I think they still exist because I talk to people down there nowadays, and they still talk about the left off of a certain Ensenada Court or Santa Clara Point right, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then you had the wall at the end of PB Drive, so that still stayed the same.
Tell me about the first surfboard that you rode.
The first surfboard that I rode was I lived on Kennebec Court by this time. We'd moved from Ensenada Court. On Kingston Court, there was a group of guys from Mission Hills that left their surfboards at Tor Svensson's house. Tor was the first advisor of the Wind and Sea Surf Club. And anyway, I think that's how my sister met Billy Castor, because he was a Mission Hills guy. Anyway, there was a guy that had a Hobie, which was one of the most predominant labels at the time. And they said, "Oh yeah, here, give it a try." And I weighed about 70 pounds, and this board was too heavy for me to carry. But I turned around, the soup blasted me in like I would on my raft. Got to my feet, the wave reformed, and I angled along and kept going until the nose hit the sand. And everyone was excited. "You stood up. You're a natural." So I thought, "Oh, I'm a surfer." That's kind of what happened.
Yeah, when you're riding boards of that era and you're 70 pounds, it's basically like standing here in this garage.
On a sidewalk, yes.
I remember hearing a story about a Velzy, like a wood Velzy.
That was when I actually, before I had my own surfboard that was made by Billy Castor, an Olympic, there was on our courts in Mission Beach, there was a lot of Zonies or Arizonans would come over for the summertime.
Okay.
And being that all my family had lived in San Diego our whole lives, we stuck home, for the summer, where a lot of the families would go back to the Midwest or the East Coast to be with their families, and they'd rent their house out, their monthly mortgage payment by the week. So 9 weeks of summer would just about pay for their mortgage all year round. And I remember this cigar-toting big old guy from Arizona walked up to me one day on my court and said, "Hey kid, you want a surfboard to ride for a couple weeks?" And I looked at him and like, "Well, yeah, but I don't understand." He goes, "I rented it from Don Clark, Coffee Bean, the local guy that was the diver that had rented surfboards. He would put Playboy pinups on his surfboard and rent the surfboards to the sailors down in Mission Beach at the Belmont Park." And so he said, "Yeah, my son tried it and he was scared of the board." Well, I saw the board. It was a balsa wood, I think a 7'10" Velzy. And so I dragged that from my house to the beach for a couple of weeks and got to surf when I felt like, and that's what really gave me the bug, having my own board.
Did you have any awareness of the name Velzy?
Not really.
Okay.
Although later, after I'd ridden the board, I came to know the name Velzy.
Yeah.
Just mostly through my sister's boyfriend, because he was a surfboard builder and a great surfer, and hung out with all the guys like Mike Hinson and Butch Van Arsdale and them. So he was aware of the Velzy name.
I wonder where that board is today.
Boy, I tell you, it was a wood board with a wood fin on it. Fin was right back on the tail. And, it was probably in Don Clark's rental arsenal for a long time. And whatever happened to that, I don't know. But it should be around somewhere.
I mean, bulletproof, kind of, right?
Yeah, a nice, heavy balsa wood board.
Yeah.
Not hollowed out or anything.
Right. I'm curious when you started kind of working with surfboards and if you ever had any jobs other than that. I mean, you had the paper route, I guess.
I did. My first job, apart from my paper route, was Phil Casagnola of the Select Surfboard fame. Now his son, Phil Casagnola Jr., is a hot local surfer. Phil was the salesperson of Olympic Surfboards, and they opened up a store right across the street from the roller coaster in Mission Beach. And he paid me $5 a month to go down at 7 in the morning and unlock the surfboard lockers so people could get their surfboards. From there, I moved on to a really great job, Uncle Susie's. It was a pancake house. Mr. Daggett and Corky Daggett. And so they wanted to, they named it after her uncle, and Susie was Bob's mom, so it was Uncle Susie was their compromise. I was a dishwasher and a busboy there. It was really neat because I worked the graveyard shift, at 15 years old, which was from 10 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning. And on Sundays, it was from 5 till 10 in the morning.
Wow.
And then from there, I polished surfboards and repaired surfboards at different factories because I felt pretty comfortable. I would just mimic what I'd see the guys building the surfboards do, wave a little catalyst over the gallon of resin and fake it and then do it. But then I got into the carpenter apprenticeship program and was a carpenter for a couple of years. And then once I started shaping my own surfboards, I was still a carpenter in the day and shaped surfboards at night until 1973 when I got rid of the carpenter trade and just 100% doing surfboards.
Was it a viable way to make a living? And did your parents have any opinion on you pursuing that?
Well, my dad wasn't in the picture from the time of the divorce until I was about 23, so he disappeared. But my mom was, she was just, I lived a pretty free life. I mean, I get picked up by the older surfers, taken to Mexico for the day and surf. As long as I was back home by the time the street lights came on, Mom had no worry about where I was or what I was doing. So it was pretty easy, and it was pretty much do what you want.
Sounds like you were financially independent from a young age too. So
yeah, I tell people that I grew up kind of as a roommate with my brother and sister and my mom, because my mom would get up every day, go to her job at Convair, come home, read the paper, do the crossword, fall asleep, and get up and do it again. And I would be up on the weekends heading out to go surfing. So it was a pretty, I had enough rope to hang myself.
But didn't
because
Amazing.
my main goal in life was not to bum my mom out because I really respected the fact that she was a single mom before women's lib, just doing it on her own. She was a very good looking woman, had a lot of men chasing after her, but she would tell them, hey, I don't want anybody messing with my kids. So, we grew up, so it was pretty good.
Sounds like, I also have kind of contextual awareness of there was a lot of older surfers too who probably took you under their wing at that time too. So.
All the guys. Skip Fry, for a while he was living down in South Mission, he'd walk up one summer, knock on my door. I would wait at about 10 minutes to 7, and he'd ride me on my bike up to Crystal Pier. We'd surf Crystal Pier and then go in and have breakfast at the Villa for 42 cents, 1 egg, toast, hash browns, and hot tea.
Wow.
Skip would have a rack of French toast, 2 eggs, hash browns, and coffee. He'd eat a lot, because he'd stay out surfing for 6 hours at a time.
Your memory is incredible.
Yeah.
I can't verify that it's all accurate or not.
Oh,
but,
it's accurate.
Okay.
The 2 cents back in 1962 That was the sales tax. It was 40
Gotcha.
cents plus the sales tax. So.
Gotcha. That's incredible. I know this is jumping way ahead in the timeline, but I'm curious to hear your perspective on how Skip, how and why he's become such a mythic figure, you know, amongst all the people in your circle who have been working for this long, building boards for this long, surfing for this long.
Skip was just the purest of guys. He never tried to skip any stones in life. He just stayed content. At one time, if he had a cut-off pair of jeans and a surfboard, he'd be happy just to sleep on the beach to surf every day. He never looked at money. He never looked at being anything other than just a beach boy. And he stuck to it. And then as his fame grew and people would go, "Oh, Skip, I could sell so many of your boards, let's put them on the machine." He got, no. He kept away from doing that to mass produce. And pretty much every board that he made was something that he would ride. And a lot of times his models are named after people because he'd make their board, stare at it for 2 days before they'd pick it up, and then just couldn't resist, had to wax it up and take it surfing, and then go, "Oh, I got to keep this," and then he'd name it after the person that he took the board from. So he was good. He was good. He's just, at 82 now, kind of the same. Just get up, and he likes routines. Likes to do the same thing, clean up before he starts working or surfing, and he still, when he surfs, he comes back, takes the wax off that board, cleans it up, patches any little dings, because he still has never worn a leash, and puts it in the board bag and puts it away until another day when that board talks to him to take it out.
Takes the wax off?
Oh, takes the wax off, cleans it off, puts it in the sun, cherries it out. That's why he has an arsenal of well over 100 boards, all like a living brochure. So when people say they want to get a Braden model, which was named after his daughter, he'd find a Braden model and surf it before he'd shape that guy the board, because he would just reflect on what he would change or how to adjust it to the person. And he's just stayed true to himself his whole life, pretty much.
I'm sure you've ridden the boards, some of his boards over the years.
Yeah.
Do they work differently?
They're not real forgiving nowadays because of the way his rail line is. But he made me an egg in 1969, and I'd ride it, and I go, "Yeah, it kind of works good." He goes, "Let me give it a try." So he took it out and he surfed it. He came in, went to his shaping room, sanded the fin off, moved it up a half an inch, glassed it back on. The board became magic. So. Also, I was pretty much just after the longboard era disappeared, we all went short in the late 60s. Into the middle 80s and onward toward the 90s, I wanted to try a longboard. So I tried one of his boards, and that's what I started making longboards for myself and other people just off of that board of his I rode.
Okay.
So, yeah, he's had a lot of influence.
I'm going to run through a couple of characters, famous characters who you've had a lot of experience with, and just hear your stories. What was your first introduction to Butch Van Arsdalen?
Butch Van Arsdalen, he was a sander for Gordon Smith. And 2 blocks away from Crystal Pier, they had their sanding room. So Butch would be in there in overalls sanding boards. And a lot of times he'd go paddle out at Crystal Pier, especially when Wind and Sea wasn't happening. This was before the Mr. Pipeline days. And one day I'm out surfing, and it's Butch Van Arsdalen. He didn't know my name, but he just saw me around. I was the littlest guy on the beach. He goes, "Hey, Grimmy, you want to go to Dana Point and get my new Hobie with me?" I said, "Gosh, Butch, I got to do my paper out at 1 o'clock today." "Oh, I'll get you back." Okay, so he had a panel van. In the back of the panel van was Peter Kahapea, Pope to Dope, the Pineapple of Hawaii. He won the junior division of Makaha back in 63 or 4. Lives in Kauai now. But we drove up about 10:45 in the morning up to Dana Point. Butch pulled into the factory. There were guys outside right as the morning overcast was burning off like it did in the summertime around 11 o'clock. Came out with his board. They all cheered around his board, checked him out. Someone tried to hand him a beer. If people know Butch's reputation, he was the beer drinking, fighting athlete guy. So I'm sitting in the back of the panel, in the front of the panel van with my head barely over the top of the dashboard. And I hear Butch go, "No thanks," point to me and say, "Got to get the Grimmy back to San Diego to do his paper out." And so many jaws dropped. And I thought to myself years later, well, there was a time when Butch Van Aerstellen passed up a beer to get the Grimmy back to do his paper route.
Amazing. I remember hearing at some point you set sail from Hawaii to Australia.
Well, it was in a P&O passenger line.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't a
It wasn't
sailing
as
trip.
exotic as that. It was
Gotcha.
safe down in the hole.
Well, let's back up then. First of all, how did you find yourself in Hawaii? What brought you there? And then tell me about that journey to Australia.
Well, the first time I went to Hawaii was selling dollar raffle tickets for the Winning Sea Surf Club.
Okay. And were you a founding member, by the way?
Yeah, I was a charter member to the juniors, which was I wasn't voted in. Just all the senior guys just picked out guys that could be in the junior division. Amongst them was Billy Hamilton and Howard Chaplow, P.D. Johnson. Then we had Kurt Slater and Johnny Sandera, Billy Sunkel, Bill Andrews, Larry Strada, just John Close, just all the Grimmies that were always at the beach up at La Jolla Shores or PB. So anyway, I was in ninth grade and I sold 272 raffle tickets, thanks to my mom taking them to work and getting people to buy it. It was for a weekend at the Islandia Hotel in Mission Bay. That $272 got me a flight to Hawaii, which was a rubber band flight, took 13 hours on
Wow.
USA OA Airlines, used some other airline. At the Waianae Baptist Church Camp in Waianae, and 2 meals a day at the Alice's Stroll Inn in Waianae.
Wow.
So from then, I'd gone to Hawaii every year after that, after I got out of high school.
Remind me the year?
Well, the first year was 1963.
Okay.
The next time was 67, 68, 69. So in 1970, I wanted to go to Australia because I had a good friend whose mom was from Australia. And she was so cool back in the days when we were like 14, 15. I went, oh man, I got to go to Australia. So I had that in my mind. So the one thing that being a carpenter did, it helped me save enough money to go to Australia for a year. And it had some good influence on me. So I didn't like to fly, but the ship ticket cost like $1,300 from Long Beach, which took you six days to go from Long Beach over to Hawaii, and then 2 weeks further on to Australia. So I figured out $160 plane ticket to Hawaii would get me to Hawaii, and then it was only like $1,000 or 900 and something to Australia from there. So I went there a couple weeks ahead of time and hung out before I got on the boat. Went with a friend of mine that I'd met from New Zealand, stopped off in Fiji, stopped off in New Zealand for 6 weeks and got to surf New Zealand a lot.
Wow.
Then went on to Australia, where I found myself at the Gordon Smith Surfboard Factory in Cronulla. Up until then, all my personal surfboards had pretty much been shaped by either Bill Castor, Mike Hinson, John Hawley, Skip Fry, Larry Gordon. So I really never had the need to make my own surfboard. But being in Australia in 1970, they still were kind of into the round 50-50 rail sort of boards, and I was hyped on the Hinson down railer. So at the G&S shop, I shaped myself a little down railer, and the sander there was named Kirby. He goes, oh, I'll take one of those. So that was my first custom order. And 30, 40 years later, I go to Noosa and I talk to the laminator, Dave Wilson, whose son was a hot longboarder at the Noosa contest. And I asked him about, how's Kirby? And he says, oh, drugs got to him. But his son's doing pretty well. I went, who's his son? He goes, Josh Kerr. I went, oh, that's why they called him Kirby, because his last name was Kerr. So I like to think that the very first custom board I ever shaped was for Josh Kerr's father.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Think of the influence, the unknown influence that had on Josh.
And you don't learn about things like that, 40 years later.
Right. Most people can't track it even. Like your memory's amazing.
Well, I don't know. I think it's from drinking green tea my whole life.
Okay, good. That's a good little secret. Okay, there's tons to unpack there. Australia, obviously. Maybe we'll just come back to Hawaii, but we'll stay in Australia for now. Or did you also surf Fiji when you stopped there?
No, we pulled into Suva, which is on the other side of the island. But I always told people, right when we came in the channel, and there were channel markers, there was a left that came off there. So people that were familiar with Fiji, knew of that left that broke pretty far out. Was there. But I had no awareness of the waves in Fiji till the endless summer. Yeah. And that wasn't much what they're talking about now. The cloud break and other places.
What was going on in New Zealand when you were there? Were there other surfers? Were there board builders?
There was a surf culture there. We'd go to Piha. I met a whole group of guys that traveled a lot and surfed. And we would go different places for the weekend. New Zealand in the late 70s was pretty wide open.
Yeah.
You'd drive, turn left at the second barn, then turn right at the first dirt road, and you'd come up on a beach, and there'd be no one there, and just be our carload of guys surfing the waves. It was pretty neat.
Yeah.
And the thing that I discovered about New Zealand was on the west side, the Tasman Sea, the waves were big and giant and pretty gnarly, but always breaking. And on the east side, which you get to in a matter of hours, was nice and clean, and the waves were real tapered and easy to ride. So you could always find surf. I found waves in the 6 weeks, I'd say at least 3 weeks worth of surf every other day, waves, one place or the other. Because Graham Bambry, who I stayed with his family, he had a Land Rover, so we were mobile.
And so his family probably had intel for where to surf too?
He and his buddies, because they were surfers.
Gotcha.
I mean, you think surfers had a bad image in California in the 60s. Well, it wasn't too much higher in the 70s in New Zealand, because they were a little bit more proper. But they were cool people.
So how long did you spend in Australia?
I stayed there about 6 to 8 months. And fortunately, when I was working polishing boards at the G&S factory in Cronulla, Terry Baker, also known as Weenie, and Alan Miss Campbell from the Gold Coast, they came through Cronulla. And I hitched a ride with them. We surfed different places up Australia. Ended up in Coolangatta. Stayed across the street from Peter Townend's house when Peter was like the 13, 14-year-old Grimmy. Had a pink surfboard. And got to know a lot of those guys back then when I turned 21 in 70. So I hung out with them. I was the California surfer that kind of been there. And back then, everyone was just excited to share their waves and their home break with other people that hadn't been around. And so there was always a connection with the Australians, New Zealanders in Pacific Beach. I think there was always a crop of Aussies or New Zealand guys from the late 60s all the way through the 70s, kind of back and forth. A lot of good guys. Cluffy, Greg Clough, that owned Aloha Surfboards. He stayed around our area, and then he was building boards in Narrabeen area. He came from the Gold Coast. Bob McTavish, a lot of guys.
Was your plan always to go work in the G&S factory and earn money while you were there? Or did that just come together?
No, it wasn't planned at all. I just I happened to meet a girl on the boat who lived in Cronulla. So Cronulla was a pretty cool beach town. And so right off the boat, I bought a Holden panel van, got a mattress in the back, headed down to Cronulla to visit her, and just right there on Tarrant Point Road was the Gordon Smith Surfboard Factory. And what was really crazy about it was set up by Floyd Smith of Gordon Smith back in '65. Well, for some reason, I'm sitting outside, my hair past my shoulders. Some guy and a woman comes walking by me and does a double take, and it was Floyd Smith. He was doing a travel around the world. And he said he was walking up going, wow, things have changed here in Cronulla since I had been here. You know, here's some long-haired, bleached-out surf guy hanging out, you know. And it was me that he had silkscreened my back in 1962 and did an ad with G&S, that label Proud to Wear. So
I saw that in their book.
It's a small world, especially in the surfing community.
Totally. So helping build boards, though, throughout that trip probably financed the trip as well.
Well, like I said, that carpenter job was pretty lucrative at the time.
Okay.
So I had enough finances to buy a car and really not work. Didn't really have to work, but, it was, being in with a group of guys, surfing their local breaks, Cronulla Point, Sand Shoes, Wollongong. I was definitely on the south side, not the north side where most of the media and stuff was hyping up Australia, but a lot of influential Australians came from the Cronulla area. I mean, Gordon Merchant, of Billabong fame, he was a guy that worked in the factory down there with another brand. A lot of guys. The most famous guy was probably got killed way ahead of his time. Bobby Brown was like a 16-year-old surfer in the World Surf Contest that ripped until the bar fight got him aced out. But yeah, a lot of guys from that area.
Was this the trip where you met Terry Fitzgerald?
Didn't meet Terry Fitzgerald that trip. I met Carl Smith, Rubber, up in Coolangatta, and Michael Peterson. Now, I'd already known the Nielsen brothers because they had come over in 1967 with Steve Sear, who immigrated to Australia back in '67, '68, and he's still there. He was a carpenter. He built most of those guys' homes and stuff up in the Gold Coast. So I didn't meet Terry until 1977.
So can you tell me about that interaction, your initial meeting, and how it turned into a business relationship?
Well, because I had been to Australia, I was really an Australiophile. I digested the Australian surf magazines. And Terry's boards in there with the soft wing and stuff like that. When I started making boards from start to finish in 1973, 74, and on, I kind of copied Terry's boards in the wing situation and all that, and I would airbrush them myself. Nothing as illustrious as the Martin Worthington, but I kind of did that. Well, along comes a guy from New Jersey that had a surf shop that saw Terry Fitzgerald at Jeffreys Bay on his infamous Speed Demon days in '76 riding Jeffreys Bay, and he wanted to make Terry's boards in America. Terry, being more than just a surfboard builder, he was a very smart business guy. He wanted to be hands-on and know what was going on. So at the time, Tony Giordano came to Billy Castor, who was making Castor surfboards at the time that were the highest of quality, going to the East Coast, and he goes, yeah, I want you to make these boards. And Billy said, nah, you want to talk to my brother-in-law, Hank Warner. So he came and spoke to me. Somehow I convinced him that I had to be the guy that shaped him. He leaves me and says, okay, well, Terry will come over here and teach you how to shape his boards, and it'll all be cool. I go, okay, that's great. And then not too long after that, I get a letter from Terry Fitzgerald saying, okay, when you get over here, Digger, I'll show you my bag of tricks. I'll be up above Rocky Point in the only A-frame up there at Reeves's house, the famous laminator over there. And I thought, this guy's out of his mind. I'm not flying to Hawaii. Well, in the mail comes a ticket from Tony going, yeah. Tony goes, yeah, Terry said, why pay for my ticket to California? Give him my ticket to come to Hawaii. So got to shape like 20 boards at Jack Reeves's house and get the templates and get into it that way.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of cool.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, there was really only two really cool international surfers. That was Terry Fitzgerald and Jerry Lopez. I mean, not to leave Barry Kanapuni out, or Kanaiaupuni, as he went to my high school. I was in 10th grade, he was in 12th. He taught me how to say his name properly, Kanaiaupuni. So, Barry was definitely guys, and there was other people, but those two were kind of the mystical, forefront guys.
Wow. So what did you get out of that relationship with him while you were there on the North Shore?
Still have the relationship with Terry. Still occasionally do hot buttered surfboards. Pay him for the label. He gives me feedback. At the time, I think it really brought me into the international realm of surfboard building and surfing and stuff through Terry. I mean, I got to judge the Bells contest, and I could have judged the Coke contest had I stayed, and I could have gone back every year and become a judge, which was pretty cool because the judge's fee at Bells was more than the third place finisher of the contest.
Wow.
So, you could be paid and go to the contest and rub shoulders with all the really hot surfers. And then apart from that, just Terry's designs and concepts, they're still with me today when it comes to building, real high performance boards. That influence.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I'm curious, you mentioned the down railer that you were working with here versus the 50/50 in Australia.
At the time, yeah.
At the time. So obviously information travels very quickly nowadays through the internet.
Yes.
And even decades prior to the internet, at least through the magazines, it would travel.
Magazines came out, every month, but it took a couple months for them to put it together.
What's up? You can interrupt.
Sure.
We could pause it.
This isn't yours, Hanky, is it?
Let me see it. So 1970, into the 70, my main goal was to make it to Byron Bay. So I left Cronulla and started heading to Byron Bay on my own. It took about 12 hours to get up there. And on the way, I go through Coffs Harbour, the banana republic of Australia. Just everything was a banana. But right on the side of the road, because the roads didn't leave too much of the coastline, they just stayed right along the coast at that time in Australia. I see an old house that says Bob Cooper Surfboards and Things. And I go, wow, Bob Cooper. So I pulled in, walked up the stairs, looked in the window, the place was closed. I'm like, yeah, Bob Cooper. I had met him as a Grimmy with Dr. Stern that wrote Surfing Guide to Southern California, brought him down to San Miguel one year. So I looked in, I think it was a Sunday afternoon. I go to get back in my car to continue driving up. The door opens, goes, okay, Yank, come on in here. How do you know I was American? Yeah, you got a pocket on your T-shirt and you parked backwards. Because they would back their cars in. I'd pulled straight in. So I started talking to Cooper. It got on the subject of Hinson's down railer. And I said, yeah, I had one. He kind of wanted to know about the Hinson's down railer. So he'd heard about it. But at the time, when Hinson made me my first down railer, a lot of people were trying to copy it. And they go, they dig. The rail line went too far up. And you go to turn, the board would stick. Hinson's worked. And Hinson goes, well, check this out, Hanky. Threw it on the ground, the carpet, and like a teeter-totter, the board rocked. Natural rocker. So when the down rail created the board to lift up, the tail was released so the tail could lift up. When it was not tail rocker, it would stop, so you would just dig. So that's where Hinson had the goods on the down railer to begin with.
Was more tail rocker.
That natural tail rocker. So when that created lift in the down rail, the board had some place to lift up. So, I kind of told Cooper that, and he was like, oh, yeah, cool. So that was part of the coconut telegraph, I guess. But
gotcha.
Things like that always happen. But I had McTavish make me a board in 1969 at the Chana Diffendorfer factory. And I said, yeah, make me, like a Wayne Lynch thing. And it was a total soft rail, groovy thing, hardtail, bitchin' board. It was a great experience. But, Hinson's were definitely a different item at the time.
Yeah. It's crazy the names that you. I mean, I guess you're right. It's a small world. So when you go somewhere and there's a surfboard factory, it is kind of the names that are famous. But as you go through your list, it's all iconic, you know.
Well, the early 60s, there weren't any icons per se.
I guess so.
I mean, Skip and Hinson idolized Phil Edwards. All we'd hear is about Phil. And then L.J. Richards and Dora. There was icons in Hawaii like George Downing or Buffalo Kealoha, Joey Cabell, things like that. But, I felt like I was like in the main grow up of the rock and roll, the Beatle era in England, because everyone that surfed lived at the beach, checked the waves every day visually, and everyone was all friends. So if Butch Van Arstel's loading up his old Hornet car with the backseat taken out and taking people up to La Jolla Shores to surf because it was a south wind, throw your board in there and go up there and surf.
Yeah.
It was all the same.
Well, I guess what's interesting to me about it too is that it's all so friendly and open, whereas I feel like there's a little bit more proprietariness now.
Yeah, well, one thing in my life that I realized that happened was in the 70s when things became very territorial and localism and stuff like that. Well, before that, all of us guys and everyone that surfed, hey, come to Coronado, surf our waves. Come to Cardiff. Come to IB. Come to Ocean Beach. Come to Sunset Cliffs. Come to we all wanted to be in there. So then when the localism thing came, you'd pull up to a spot. People would look at you like this is local. They're gonna rip your tires or something. You paddle out, and the head guy, the guy with the top of the pecking order, was a guy older, like had surfed when you. Oh, they would recognize like that. And then all of a sudden the new guys, the newbies that were really the ones that were so worried about localism, they would go, oh, okay. So, we all could still surf during that localism era.
Yeah.
Because we'd all been a part of that before it. And that was a cool thing, experiencing surfing at that time.
When you'd come back from a trip like that to Australia, were guys like Skip and Hinson eager to glean insights that you had gathered from working with board builders over there?
Not really. Those guys, they were still, way ahead of their times. They had their own thing. Skip was doing his boards. Hinson was doing his. I had given some templates to Billy Castor. It did. But coming back from there, California was gone queer for Hawaiian guns. So you got people riding 2-foot waves on a real narrow-looking gun. And, of course, Skip wasn't. Skip was riding his eggs and stuff. But and Hinson was just glued to blacks until the waves got big so he could, ride his boards. But at the time, I had gone to the East Coast in 1969 for Challenger surfboards because Billy Casher was shaping them then. Bobby Thomas owned it. And before trade shows, the West Coast surfboard builders had to send a team to hit all the dealers on the East Coast before there was a trade show. And that's where I met Yancey Spencer in Pensacola. And so I was more influenced by the Australian movement of performance surfboards, not so much the Hawaiian guns stand on the tail and just, look cool. I used to tell my local surf spot guys, like, what are you guys out surfing for? Just get a 2x4 and bounce on a rock and surf. I want to, bang off the lip and snap cutbacks and stuff. So I started going to Florida and building boards there in Pensacola with Yancey Spencer. And I would go in the wintertime, and that's when they'd have their most waves, and it was just great surfing all in the 70s back then.
Was it really?
And I surfed places on the East Coast, Delaware, North Carolina, Jacksonville. Incredible offshore peaky waves where you could just look up and down the beach and go, let's go surf that peak, because it wasn't that crowded in the winter times back there.
Yeah.
So I got to keep that Australian stoke even up until the times where I actually met Terry Fitzgerald. And then through him, Derek Hine and Steve Wilson and and all those guys. Poto, they all stayed at my house on the floor over the years, and still keep in contact with them.
Tell me about Yansy as a figure.
Yancey was just a guy that was surf stoked, and just all he wanted to do was surf, and he could surf a wave that was 6 inches or bigger and super flowing, and just ripped him, just always surfing. One thing I like to remember is I made him a copy of a skip fried egg. I thought it was a copy, but that's what we called it. For him in 1972, he ended up riding that board in the first man-on-man competition pro contest in North Carolina. It was a double elimination. It was called the manufacturer Ripoff. Every manufacturer could enter a guy for $100. Well, Yancey wanted to surf on it. And at that time, we had our own label, AGP, which stood for Atlantic Gulf Pacific. I was the Pacific. He was the Gulf. Jimbo Brothers was the Atlantic. He rode that board all the way to the finals. Got past Nueva, Tabling, all these guys, and he got to the finals. Dale Dobson was all that was left, and neither of them had lost. So he had to beat Dale 2 times, and he did. The first 2 times out, he beat Dale. Small little waves, but clean, and he could rip those waves on that board. Won $1,000.
Wow.
That was big money, and it was a man-on-man. I know that people say, oh, the Stubby's the first man-on-man in 77. Nope, first man-on-man was 1972, the manufacturer Ripoff contest in North Carolina.
Where in North Carolina?
At Atlantic Beach.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So you said you went over there basically on a sales trip for Challenger,
Right.
But you're building the boards there.
No,
so you're
no.
not
That was, I was just along with Neil Norris to go up and down.
Gotcha.
We hit all the dealers from Florida up to New York.
Okay.
And that was in 69. Well, after that, I did my Australia stint, and then started shaping more. And then Yancey would go to Delaware every summertime because there was waves there, and met a group of guys. At one trip was Mark Fu, who was learning how to surf in Delaware, and his parents were living in Washington, D.C. And he, at the time, his parents were going to move back to Hawaii. He didn't want to leave because he wanted to surf, so he jumped on with the Pensacola, Florida guys, and stayed with J.B. Falbo in Pensacola so he could surf before he ever went to Hawaii and got a lot of photos of himself. So I made him boards.
Mark Fu learned how to surf in Delaware?
Yeah. Delaware has great surf. There's
Hush, hush.
There's some good surf spots there and great surfers, Gary Revel and
Yeah.
the Clark brothers and those guys. But so anyway, there was these guys from Florida that were making surfboards in the garage up there, and Yancey said, well, would you guys come to Pensacola in the winter and make some boards for us down there? And the one guy said, well, if you get the guy that shaped your board to come shape them, I'll come down and glass them. So that's how I got going down there in 71. Drove across country with Marty Fitch and Johnny Sandera. Long hair, going through Louisiana, getting pulled over in my Mercedes, surfboards on top. Hey, there ain't no skiing on around here. Where you guys going skiing? Oh, these are surfboards. We're going down to Florida to surf. There's surf in Florida? No one knew that, but it was a funny trip. But we made some boards, and then after that, I would load up a trailer with like 50 blanks that I'd get from Larry Gordon at Gordon Smith.
Okay.
Get a drummer resin, fins, and I did 6 boards myself from start to finish for like 2 months.
Wow.
Every year for several years down there. And guys like Beezer Turner and Brad English, The Animal, J.B. Falbo, Mark Fu, I was making their boards, and Jerry Blank. So that kind of kept me going through the 70s with the surf stoke and not getting hooked into imagining I was riding a 50-foot wave on a Hawaiian gun and 2-foot slop at Crystal Pier.
Right. It's interesting. So you have all these influences who you're exposed to. What were you interested in building for Hank Warner's shapes?
Mine were always pretty much a racy-looking wider board with a lot of wings, because I figured, wider board's faster, but the wings would diminish the tail, because these were like single fins, so you want them to hold in. And I got the very best fins made at the time from Obayashi up in by the Bain factory.
Okay.
That was through my brother-in-law, Billy Castor Surfboards, because Obayashi would make a batch of fins, offer them to my brother-in-law, and then the rest would go to Mitch's surf shop. And so I would get them from him to glass on.
What made them the best?
He was just a craftsman. He was making hollow boards with wood outside, so they had a great foil to them. The thickness in the foil was something that Mike Hinson got into when he was trying to make the dolphin fins after he got in the dolphin tank at SeaWorld and saw how the curve and how actually a little bit of thickness with a great foil would be faster through the water than thin. And so he was just made beautiful, beautiful fins. And it was a one-man show, and he could write his own ticket. He liked to ski, so he'd make a batch of fins, sell them, go skiing, come back and do that. He was an icon as far as the early glass-on fins were, apart from, the early 60s when they were all glassed on.
Yeah. So you're developing Hank Warner shapes here in San Diego, but also still traveling to Florida once a year?
Yeah, doing that. And, of course, it's all trial and error. You surf, you hear about it. People come and go. A lot of Australians, Derek Hine would come. I'd make them boards. Him a little twin fin. Poto, Steve Wilson. And then Fitz would come and, have a new template idea or a new outline. I'd use those.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was just Joe Ropers and the local San Diegans and stuff, but going to the East Coast and riding their waves, which was totally different. It's led me into Yancy's youngest son, Sterling Spencer, making boards for him. A lot of people have made him boards, and he rips on all of them. But I think he likes working with me because I actually can relate to how the waves are generated in the Gulf Coast in Florida. They're wind waves. They're closer together. They kind of turn inside out. You ride a lot of junky, choppy waves because that's the only way you get waves is with the wind. And if you're fortunate enough, it's a big wind that blows up the waves so big you couldn't even paddle outside, and then the cold front hits it, and within an hour, it's clean, long lines from 6 foot all the way down to 6 inches until they disappear with the offshore wind.
Wow.
So,
well, you guys are currently have a board model that you're doing under the label Centaur Shapes.
yeah, well, Sterling's
Or sleds, I guess.
he's a character. I mean, for years he's been going into the supermarket as a centaur. You'd pull wheels behind him of a horse, and he'd be his head, and he'd do the centaur thing, and and he was a great surfer. About middle of December, he texted me and said, "Hey, Uncle Hank, can we make a model?" I said, "Well, what are you after?" And so he sent me a bunch of pictures off my Instagram, and what it turned out to be was a narrower nose of a fish, a classic Steve List San Diego fish, a little narrower of my power hole, which was a wide double wing board with the soft up front, with the bottom of the Mini Simmons, which was bellied out and soft in the nose, going back to hard. So we kind of put those three things together, and he's having a great time riding on that. He'd say, "Oh, it worked really good," and then I'd get a message from him, "I was riding giant barrels, and it worked even better." He's pumped. So because of his Pinch My Salt podcast and stuff, people have been contacting me from all over the States going, how do I get one of these Sterling Spencer Centaur models? So
tell me more about the tail and the fin setup.
They're all quads. There's little teeny channels off the swallowtail. It's a double winger. The quad setup, it's not like the early quads, which are basically just a hyper twin fin. I call my quads or four fins, more like a double thruster, because the rear fins are closer together than out on the rail. So, we found the closer and closer the rear fins got, the more snappier the board got still, but still had projection like a tri-fin. And then eventually they get too close, and then it just is back to like a tri-fin. So I keep them a little bit further apart, but not out on the rail.
Okay.
And that gives it drive, but it also gets it quick rail-to-rail action.
Gotcha.
And it works really good.
How big do you ride the boards? Like if somebody's normal shortboard is like 6.0, let's say?
You could ride it like a 5.6.
So a little bit shorter, maybe like a
kind of
fish.
like a fish.
Okay.
I'd say what you'd ride a fish, 4 inches lower than you want. Sterling, I made him a power hole years ago. It was 5.2. He wanted this board to be 5.2 or 3. And I went, well, we're diminishing a little bit of the outline. So I talked him into 5.6. And, he's digging on that. So that's about right.
Got it. How early did his personality, that as we know it now, did that develop, or did you see that?
I remember going back to Pensacola back in the 80s and 90s, going to the trade shows now in Orlando, and I always would go through Pensacola to visit my friends. And there was Sterling, a little 6 or 7-year-old guy, bouncing off the walls, just barely missing, hitting his head on the edge of the coffee table. And Yansy and I would just look and go, oh, God, he's just a dynamite. And Sterling goes, I'm Suki Man. I think he thought he was Superman. But so he had that funny personality, I think way back in the day. He had the older brother that was Yansy the Fourth, that's a great surfer. And then that's funny is last night I was watching TV, and on comes this new TV show, Extended Family, with Abigail Spencer as the star. That's the sister.
I know.
And so Abby, she's been in the movies and stuff since 20, 30 years ago.
One of the best friends of Meghan Markle, too.
Yes,
the royal.
Actually, I saw her at the wedding in England when Meghan Markle got married, and there was her contingent of buddies, and there was Abby. I've known Abby since she was a little girl.
What a family.
Yeah. Not to forget the mom, Lydia.
Oh, really? I don't know
great.
anything about Lydia.
She's a fantastic violinist and singer and musician, pianist.
Wow.
Good woman.
Will that kick off pretty quick?
Yeah.
Okay, let's give it a little moment.